December 1948, a 52-year-old milkshake machine salesman named Ray Kroc received an order that confused him. A single drive-in restaurant in San Bernardino, California, wanted to purchase 8 multi-mixers, machines that could make 5 milkshakes simultaneously. Most restaurants ordered 1, maybe 2 machines. 8 machines meant this restaurant was making 40 milkshakes at once. Kroc had to see this operation. When he arrived at the McDonald Brothers restaurant in 1954, he found a system producing hundreds of hamburgers daily with speed and consistency that seemed impossible. The kitchen operated like a factory assembly line. Customers received food in 30 seconds. The operation generated enormous profits from 15-cent hamburgers. The McDonald brothers had created the template for fast food, but lacked the ambition to expand beyond a handful of franchise locations. Kroc saw something they didn't, a system that could be replicated thousands of times. He convinced the brothers to make him their exclusive franchising agent for a pittance. Then he systematically undermined their authority, took control of the brand, and ultimately forced them to sell for $2.7 million, a fraction of what the company would soon be worth. The brothers ended up with nothing, no royalties, no stake in the empire built on their system. By the time Ray Kroc died in 1984, McDonald's was worth billions. The McDonald brothers were forgotten footnotes. This wasn't a business partnership. This was a methodical appropriation of someone else's innovation, executed through contracts, financial pressure, and ruthless determination. The story of how Ray Kroc acquired McDonald's from founders Richard and Maurice McDonald represents one of the most controversial business takeovers in American history, raising fundamental questions about the relationship between innovation and commercialization, about the ethics of business partnerships, and about whether success justifies the methods used to achieve it. The McDonald brothers, Richard Dick and Maurice Mac, were the true innovators who created the fast food system that would transform American dining. They weren't restaurateurs by training, but rather entrepreneurs who had operated a movie theater and then a traditional drive-in restaurant before creating their revolutionary Speedee Service System in 1948. This system eliminated car hops, reduced the menu to 9 items, and reorganized the kitchen as an assembly line where each worker performed specific tasks repeatedly. The innovations were comprehensive and systematic. The kitchen layout positioned cooking equipment so food flowed logically from preparation through cooking to assembly and delivery. The limited menu allowed specialization and eliminated the delays that came from preparing diverse dishes. The focus on speed meant rethinking every process. Hamburgers were assembled in advance during slow periods, French fries were pre-cut, and drinks were pre-poured. The result was that customers received food in seconds rather than minutes. The operational efficiency translated to financial success. The original McDonald's restaurant in San Bernardino generated profits of approximately $100,000 annually by the early 1950s, extraordinary for a restaurant selling 15-cent hamburgers. This profitability came from volume enabled by speed and from low costs achieved through simplified operations and economies of scale in purchasing. The brothers took home roughly $75,000 to $100,000 annually in profits, substantial income that provided comfortable living without requiring expansion. The brothers' approach to franchising was cautious and selective. They granted a handful of franchises in California and Arizona, charging modest fees and providing operational guidance. But they weren't interested in building a national chain. They were satisfied with their income. They didn't want the stress of managing a large organization, and they valued their lifestyle over maximizing wealth. This contentment would prove to be their undoing when they encountered someone who didn't share their limits on ambition. Raymond Albert Kroc was born in 1902 in Oak Park, Illinois, to parents of modest means. He left high school to serve in World War I as an ambulance driver, then worked various sales jobs including paper cups, real estate, and eventually milkshake machines. His career through his 50s was characterized by modest success and occasional failures. He wasn't wealthy or particularly accomplished. He was a salesman grinding out a living, selling machines to restaurants that often went out of business owing him money. The milkshake machine business that brought Kroc to the McDonald brothers was itself struggling. The multi-mixer, which could make multiple milkshakes simultaneously, had seemed like a good product for the post-war restaurant expansion. But sales were disappointing. Kroc was in his early 50s, not particularly financially secure, and facing the prospect of a career that hadn't achieved the success he believed he deserved. This combination of modest circumstances and burning ambition would drive his approach to the McDonald's opportunity. The character traits that would define Kroc's handling of the McDonald's relationship were already apparent. He was intensely competitive and driven by a need to succeed that went beyond financial security to encompass status and recognition. He was willing to take risks that more cautious businessmen avoided. He had flexible ethics that allowed him to rationalize actions that served his interests even when those actions harmed partners or violated implicit understandings. And he had the persistence to continue pushing toward goals even when facing obstacles or resistance. The initial visit to the McDonald brothers restaurant in 1954 changed Kroc's life because he immediately recognized what the brothers apparently didn't, that their system could be replicated nationwide, and that whoever controlled that expansion would build an empire. The brothers had created something extraordinary, but lacked either the vision or the desire to exploit its full potential. Kroc had the vision, the desire, and as it would turn out, the ruthlessness to take their creation and build it into something that would make him wealthy and famous while leaving them marginalized. The fundamentally different perspectives the McDonald brothers and Ray Kroc brought to their relationship explain much of what followed. The brothers were innovators and operators who had solved a problem, how to serve good food quickly and profitably, and who were content with the financial and lifestyle rewards that solution provided. Kroc was a promoter and empire builder who saw the solution not as an end in itself, but as a vehicle for building wealth and achieving the success that had eluded him for decades. These incompatible perspectives made conflict inevitable. Ray Kroc's first visit to the McDonald brothers' San Bernardino restaurant in 1954 has become legendary in business history, representing the moment when an ambitious salesman recognized an opportunity that its creators undervalued. Understanding what Kroc saw and how he positioned himself reveals both the brothers' innovations and Kroc's ability to recognize and exploit opportunities. The drive from Los Angeles to San Bernardino took Kroc several hours, giving him time to wonder why a single restaurant would need 8 milkshake machines. As he approached the location at 14th and E Streets, he saw crowds of customers, unusual for mid-afternoon when most restaurants were quiet. The parking lot was full. People were lined up at walk-up windows. The operation was clearly doing extraordinary business. The observation of the operation in action revealed the system's genius. Customers ordered at windows and received their food within 30 seconds. The hamburgers were prepared identically: bun, meat patty, ketchup, mustard, pickle, and onion, with no customization and no delays for special requests. The French fries were perfectly consistent. The drinks were already in cups. The employees moved with precision, each performing specific tasks repeatedly. The kitchen operated like a factory assembly line. The conversation with Dick and Mac McDonald revealed that the system was deliberate and carefully developed. The brothers explained how they had redesigned their previous car hop drive-in into this streamlined operation. They had drawn the kitchen layout on a tennis court with chalk, positioning equipment for optimal workflow. They had eliminated everything that slowed service or added complexity. They had trained employees to perform specific tasks rather than expecting them to handle multiple roles. The result was speed, consistency, and profitability. The financial discussion revealed numbers that astonished Kroc. The brothers explained they were each taking home approximately $75,000 annually in profits, roughly $750,000 in today's dollars. They achieved this from 15-cent hamburgers by selling enormous volume at low cost. The average transaction was perhaps 75 cents to $1, but the restaurant served hundreds of customers daily. The math was compelling. Modest prices times huge volume equals substantial profits. The franchising revelation came when Kroc learned the brothers had already granted some franchises but weren't actively pursuing expansion. They had licensed perhaps 10 locations in California and Arizona, charging modest franchise fees and providing operational guidance. But they weren't promoting franchising aggressively because they were satisfied with their income and didn't want the headaches of managing a large franchise organization. This contentment baffled Kroc, who immediately saw that the system could support thousands of franchises. The pitch Kroc made to the brothers emerged over several conversations. He argued that their system was too valuable to limit to a handful of locations. He emphasized that competitors would inevitably copy their innovations. Better to franchise aggressively using the McDonald's name than to allow imitators to capture the market. He positioned himself as the person who could manage nationwide franchising without the brothers having to involve themselves in day-to-day operations. And he appealed to their legacy, suggesting they had a responsibility to share their innovations broadly. The brothers' resistance was based on practical concerns and philosophical preferences. They had tried working with franchise operators who didn't follow the system properly, producing inferior food that damaged the McDonald's reputation. They didn't want to spend their time policing franchises or resolving disputes. They liked their lifestyle in San Bernardino and didn't want the stress of building a national company. And they weren't motivated by maximizing wealth. They had sufficient income and valued leisure and autonomy over additional money. The negotiation process that led to the 1955 franchising agreement took months of persuasion. Kroc visited repeatedly, always returning to the theme that the brothers were missing an extraordinary opportunity. He offered to handle all franchising activities, relieving them of operational burdens. He proposed compensation structures that seemed to address their concerns while giving him the authority he needed, and he persisted despite their hesitations, wearing down their resistance through constant pressure. The final agreement, signed in 1955, gave Kroc exclusive rights to franchise McDonald's restaurants nationally, with the brothers retaining California franchise rights and receiving 0.5% of gross sales from franchises. Kroc would receive 1.4% of gross sales as his franchising fee. The agreement seemed to protect the brothers' interests. They kept control of their original territory. They received ongoing royalties, and they maintained authority over the McDonald's system and standards. But the agreement contained ambiguities and gaps that Kroc would exploit. The critical weaknesses in the agreement included that while the brothers retained rights to approve franchises and to maintain quality standards, the practical mechanisms for exercising these rights weren't clearly specified. Kroc controlled the franchising process and the relationship with franchisees, potentially allowing him to create facts on the ground that the brothers couldn't easily override. The agreement didn't clearly establish how conflicts would be resolved or what authority the brothers had to terminate the agreement if Kroc violated its terms. And the financial arrangements created incentives for Kroc to maximize franchising revenue, even if that compromised quality or the brothers' interests. The early years of Ray Kroc's McDonald's franchising operation from 1955 to 1961 reveal how he built a franchise system while simultaneously accumulating leverage over the McDonald brothers. Understanding this period shows how Kroc used his control of operations to gradually undermine the brothers' authority. The first McDonald's franchise Kroc opened was in Des Plaines, Illinois, in April 1955, a location he could personally oversee while establishing the systems and standards for future franchises. The Des Plaines location was meticulously designed to replicate the San Bernardino operation, with kitchen layout, equipment specifications, and operating procedures copied from the brothers' system. Kroc understood that consistency was essential to the concept's success. The franchising model Kroc developed required franchisees to pay an initial franchise fee of $950, plus ongoing service fees of 1.9% of gross sales. From this 1.9%, Kroc's company kept 1.4% and sent 0.5% to the McDonald brothers as their royalty. This structure meant Kroc's revenue was tied directly to franchise sales volume, creating strong incentives to sell franchises and to maximize franchise revenues. The model also required franchisees to purchase equipment and supplies from approved vendors, creating additional revenue streams Kroc would later exploit. The franchise selection process emphasized operators who would work in their restaurants rather than absentee investors. Kroc believed that owner-operators who depended on their restaurants for income would maintain quality and follow the system more reliably than investors who hired managers. This philosophy led him to recruit franchisees from working and middle-class backgrounds, people for whom the franchise represented their primary livelihood and investment. The training program Kroc established required franchisees and their managers to spend time at Des Plaines or other operating locations learning the McDonald's system before opening their restaurants. The training covered every aspect of operations, from food preparation to customer service, to accounting. The emphasis on systematic training ensured consistency across locations and indoctrinated franchisees into the McDonald's way of operating. The quality control mechanisms Kroc implemented included detailed operating manuals, regular inspections, and requirements that franchisees maintain standards or face termination. The operating manual specified everything from cooking temperatures to cleaning schedules to customer service scripts. Inspectors visited franchises unannounced, checking food quality, cleanliness, and adherence to procedures. Franchisees who failed inspections received warnings and were required to correct deficiencies or risk losing their franchises. The expansion pace was aggressive from the start. Kroc opened 8 franchises in 1955, then accelerated to dozens annually in subsequent years. By 1960, there were over 200 McDonald's franchises operating, with new locations opening weekly. This rapid expansion created momentum and scale that made McDonald's increasingly valuable and that gave Kroc growing power independent of the McDonald brothers. The financial struggles Kroc faced, despite growing franchise numbers, revealed problems with the franchise model's economics. The 1.4% franchise fee Kroc received didn't provide sufficient revenue to cover the costs of site selection, franchise training, quality control, and corporate overhead. The company was operating close to break-even or at losses despite the expanding franchise base. Kroc needed additional revenue sources to make the business sustainable. The relationship with the McDonald brothers during this period was characterized by growing tension. The brothers visited some franchise locations and were dismayed by quality variations and by operational changes Kroc or franchisees had implemented. They complained that Kroc wasn't maintaining the standards they had established. Kroc resented their criticisms and their control over the brand, viewing their involvement as interference rather than legitimate oversight of their creation. The conflicts over menu additions exemplified the tensions. Kroc and some franchisees wanted to add items to the limited menu to boost sales. The brothers insisted on maintaining the simple menu that made the system work. When Kroc or franchisees added items anyway, the brothers protested that this violated the franchise agreement and compromised the McDonald's concept. These disputes revealed the fundamental ambiguity in the agreement about who controlled operational decisions. The geographic expansion created another source of conflict. The brothers' agreement gave them California franchise rights, meaning Kroc couldn't franchise in the brothers' territory. But as franchising spread across the country, California became an obvious market that Kroc's franchise system couldn't penetrate while the brothers controlled that territory. This geographic division became increasingly problematic as the brand's value grew. The discovery of the real estate opportunity came through Harry Sonneborn, a financial executive Kroc hired in 1956. Sonneborn recognized that McDonald's real profit potential wasn't in franchise fees, but in real estate. If McDonald's Corporation purchased or leased restaurant sites and then subleased them to franchisees at marked-up rates, the company could generate substantial revenue while also controlling franchisees through the threat of lease termination. This insight would transform the business model and give Kroc the financial leverage to eventually buy out the brothers. Ray Kroc's systematic accumulation of control over the McDonald's brand and operations from 1955 to 1961 occurred through contractual interpretation, operational dominance, and creation of parallel corporate structures that marginalized the McDonald brothers. Understanding these mechanisms reveals how Kroc used ambiguities and practical control to undermine the brothers' authority. The trademark and naming rights became a critical battleground because the original 1955 agreement was ambiguous about who owned the McDonald's name and Golden Arches logo. The brothers had created these identifying elements and used them in San Bernardino and their few franchises. But as Kroc's franchises spread nationally, the name and logo became associated primarily with his franchise system rather than with the brothers' original restaurant. Kroc began acting as if he controlled the brand, registering trademarks and licensing the name to franchisees without necessarily consulting the brothers. The operating standards disputes arose from different interpretations of what maintaining quality required. The brothers believed maintaining standards meant strict adherence to their original system, limited menu, specific preparation methods, prescribed equipment, and no variations. Kroc believed maintaining standards meant ensuring food quality and customer satisfaction, but with flexibility to adapt to local markets. or to implement improvements. These different philosophies led to constant conflicts over whether specific changes constituted legitimate operational improvements or violations of the system. The franchise approval process created leverage for Kroc because while the agreement required the brothers' approval of franchises, Kroc controlled the franchise application and selection process. He could present the brothers with franchise candidates he had already vetted and approved, making it difficult for them to reject applications without specific cause. If they rejected a candidate Kroc supported, he could argue they were being unreasonably obstructive. This practical control meant the brothers' theoretical approval rights became less meaningful. The financial information asymmetry gave Kroc advantages because he controlled the franchise accounting and reporting systems. The brothers received quarterly royalty payments based on franchise sales reports Kroc's company prepared. They didn't have independent access to verify these reports or to audit franchise revenues. This created opportunities for Kroc to underreport sales or to interpret which revenues were subject to royalty payments in ways that benefited him at the brothers' expense. The franchisee relationships were managed entirely by Kroc's organization, making franchisees loyal to Kroc rather than to the brothers. Franchisees communicated with Kroc's company about operational issues, purchased equipment through Kroc's approved vendors, and looked to Kroc's organization for support and guidance. The brothers had no direct relationships with franchisees and no practical ability to influence franchise operations. This meant the brothers' theoretical authority over the system had no operational force. The marketing and advertising decisions were made by Kroc without meaningful brother input, despite the brothers theoretically having authority over the brand. As franchising expanded, Kroc's organization developed national marketing campaigns, created advertising materials, and established the brand identity consumers experienced. The brothers' original vision became less relevant as Kroc's marketing shaped public perception of McDonald's. The brothers could complain about marketing they disliked, but they lacked practical power to stop it. The menu evolution occurred despite the brothers' objections through franchisee experimentation that Kroc tacitly or explicitly approved. The filet-o-fish sandwich, developed by a franchisee in Cincinnati to serve Catholic customers during Lent, provided a model. When the product succeeded, Kroc added it to the national menu despite the brothers' preference for the original limited menu. Similar additions occurred with other items, as franchisees and Kroc prioritized sales over the brothers' systematic purity. The real estate subsidiary that Harry Sonneborn convinced Kroc to create in 1956, Franchise Realty Corporation, became the mechanism through which Kroc accumulated wealth and control independent of the franchise agreement with the brothers. This subsidiary purchased or leased restaurant sites and then subleased them to franchisees at markup. The revenue from real estate transactions wasn't clearly subject to the brothers' royalty because the franchise agreement specified royalties on franchise service fees, not on all McDonald's Corporation revenues. This created a major revenue stream the brothers didn't share. The financial transformation achieved through the real estate strategy was dramatic. By the early 1960s, McDonald's Corporation was generating more profit from real estate markups than from franchise fees. The company's balance sheet strengthened as it accumulated real estate assets, and Kroc personally became wealthy through his ownership stake in the corporation that owned the real estate, even though the franchise fee income remained modest. This financial success occurred entirely outside the brothers' view and benefit. The incorporation and corporate structure Kroc established created legal entities that complicated the relationship with the brothers. McDonald's Corporation was Kroc's company that held the franchise agreement with the brothers. Franchise Realty Corporation was a subsidiary of McDonald's Corporation that handled real estate. Various regional corporations managed franchises in different areas. This corporate complexity made it difficult for the brothers to understand where money was flowing or to verify they were receiving appropriate royalties. The financial mechanisms Ray Kroc and Harry Sonneborn developed to build McDonald's Corporation's value while minimizing payments to the McDonald brothers represent sophisticated corporate finance that exploited contractual ambiguities and the brothers' limited business sophistication. Understanding these mechanisms reveals how Kroc accumulated wealth the brothers couldn't access. The real estate model's basic structure involved Franchise Realty Corporation leasing land for 20 years, constructing a McDonald's building, and then subleasing the property to a franchisee for 20 years at a rate that covered the original lease cost, plus a 240% markup, plus building amortization. For example, if Franchise Realty leased land for $500 monthly, it might sublease to the franchisee for $700, $800 monthly. On hundreds of locations, this created millions in annual revenue and accumulated real estate assets worth tens of millions. The financial leverage achieved through this model was substantial. Franchise Realty borrowed money to purchase or improve sites, using the 20-year franchise leases as collateral. The franchisee lease payments exceeded the land lease costs and debt service, generating positive cash flow. As leases were paid down and properties appreciated, McDonald's Corporation accumulated valuable real estate equity. This wealth creation occurred entirely outside the franchise agreement that entitled the brothers to royalties. The accounting treatment of real estate revenues likely excluded them from the royalty calculation the brothers received. The franchise agreement specified that the brothers received 0.5% of gross sales from franchising operations. The real estate markups could be characterized as property management fees or lease income rather than as franchising revenue, potentially excluding them from royalty obligations without access to detailed accounting records. The brothers probably couldn't determine if they were entitled to portions of real estate revenues. The franchisee fee structure created additional revenue streams that bypassed the brothers. Beyond the initial franchise fee and ongoing 1.9% service fee, split 1.4% to Kroc, 0.5% to brothers, franchisees paid for training, purchased equipment from approved vendors, and bought supplies through McDonald's distribution systems. Each of these transactions generated revenue for Kroc's corporate entities, but not necessarily for the brothers. The franchise agreement covered franchise fees, but didn't clearly address these ancillary revenues. The equipment and supply arrangements became profit centers through approved vendor programs where suppliers paid fees or rebates to McDonald's Corporation in exchange for being designated as approved vendors that franchisees were required to use. For example, a food supplier might pay McDonald's Corporation a percentage of sales to franchisees in exchange for exclusive or preferred status. These payments increased McDonald's Corporation's revenues without being clearly subject to the brothers' royalty. The corporation valuation reflected all these revenue streams and assets, making McDonald's Corporation increasingly valuable, even though the franchise fee income that the brothers shared remained modest. Investors and potential buyers valued the company based on total cash flows, including real estate, vendor relationships, and growth potential, not just on the franchise fees. This meant Kroc's ownership stake in the corporation appreciated dramatically, while the brothers' royalty stream from franchise fees grew more slowly. The brothers' financial situation contrasted starkly with Kroc's growing wealth. The brothers received their 0.5% royalty on franchise gross sales, which by 1960 generated perhaps $200,000 annually for them to split. Substantial income, but not transformative wealth. Meanwhile, Kroc's ownership of McDonald's Corporation, which controlled real estate worth tens of millions and had revenue streams from multiple sources, made him increasingly wealthy on paper even before the company went public. The public offering discussions that began in the early 1960s created pressure to resolve the ambiguous ownership situation. Taking McDonald's Corporation public would require clear ownership of all trademarks and rights. The brothers' theoretical authority over the brand and their separate California operation created complications that investors wouldn't accept. Either the brothers had to be fully bought out, or their rights had to be clearly defined and limited in ways that wouldn't interfere with corporate operations. The buyout negotiations that led to the 1961 purchase were characterized by information asymmetry and leverage imbalance. Kroc knew exactly what McDonald's Corporation was worth because he controlled its finances. The brothers had limited information about the corporation's true value, knowing only that their royalty stream was substantial and that the McDonald's brand had become nationally known. Kroc used this information advantage and his control of operations to pressure the brothers into selling. The purchase price of $2.7 million for the brothers' rights to McDonald's, $1.35 million each after taxes and expenses, seemed substantial in 1961, but represented a fraction of the company's actual value. McDonald's Corporation was generating profits that justified valuations in the tens of millions. Within a few years of the purchase, The corporation went public at a valuation exceeding $100 million. The brothers had been bought out for perhaps 3% of what their creation was worth. The terms of the 1961 sale were particularly harsh to the brothers in retrospect. Beyond the $2.7 million purchase price, the brothers retained no ongoing interest in McDonald's Corporation. They received no royalty on future sales, no equity stake that would appreciate with company growth, and no recognition as founders beyond historical footnote. Additionally, Kroc allegedly reneged on a handshake agreement to pay them continued royalties, later claiming the deal was only for the $2.7 million with no additional payments. This allegedly deliberate betrayal exemplified Kroc's approach to the relationship. The final appropriation of the McDonald brothers' legacy occurred not in the 1961 sale itself, but in the subsequent years when Ray Kroc consolidated his control and when the brothers' contributions were minimized or erased from the company's official history. Understanding this final phase reveals how complete Kroc's victory was and how thoroughly the brothers were marginalized, and how the mechanisms of corporate control, historical narrative construction, and ruthless business execution combined to create one of the most one-sided outcomes in American business history. The original San Bernardino restaurant became a point of contention after the 1961 sale because the brothers retained the right to keep operating their original location but lost the right to use the McDonald's name. The legal technicality was that Kroc had purchased all rights to the McDonald's trademark and brand identity, and the brothers' continued use of the name would constitute trademark infringement. This forced the brothers to rename the restaurant that they had built, that bore their family name, and that had pioneered the entire fast food concept. They chose to call it the Big M, a transparent attempt to maintain some connection to their original brand while complying with the legal requirement to abandon the McDonald's name. The psychological impact of this forced renaming on the brothers was devastating. Imagine creating a revolutionary business system, building it into a successful operation that attracted customers from across the region, and then being forced to remove your own name from the building because someone else had acquired legal rights to that name. The humiliation was compounded by the fact that the name wasn't some corporate designation, but their family name. McDonald's had meant the McDonald Brothers Restaurant, and now they were legally prohibited from using their own name in that context. The competitive assault Kroc allegedly launched against the brothers' original restaurant demonstrated vindictiveness that went beyond business necessity. According to some accounts, Kroc deliberately opened a McDonald's franchise near the brothers' San Bernardino location with the explicit intention of driving their restaurant out of business. This wasn't about protecting market share or maximizing corporate profits. The San Bernardino market was tiny compared to McDonald's national operations. This was about erasing the last vestige of the brothers' independent operation and ensuring that no McDonald's restaurant existed outside Kroc's complete control. The business dynamics of this competition were brutal and asymmetric. The brothers' Big M restaurant was a single independent operation with limited resources and no corporate support. The new McDonald's franchise had the backing of a national corporation, benefited from national advertising, offered the familiar McDonald's branding that customers recognized, and could operate at a loss if necessary because corporate resources could subsidize it. The brothers couldn't compete against these advantages, and their restaurant's business declined as customers chose the real McDonald's over what appeared to be an imitation. The financial pressures this competition created forced the brothers to eventually sell or close their original restaurant, eliminating even the modest income they had been deriving from continuing to operate. The timeline of exactly when the Big M closed and under what circumstances is somewhat murky in historical records, but the outcome was clear. The brothers ended their involvement in the restaurant business entirely within a few years of the 1961 sale. They had gone from successful restaurant operators taking home six-figure annual incomes to being completely out of the industry they had revolutionized. The historical revisionism began almost immediately as Kroc positioned himself as McDonald's founder in company communications, interviews, and later in his autobiography, Grinding It Out, published in 1977. The book's narrative presented Kroc as the visionary who had recognized the potential of a small California restaurant and had built it into a global empire through determination, hard work, and business acumen. While Kroc acknowledged that the McDonald brothers had operated the original restaurant and had developed the Speedee Service System, he minimized their contributions and portrayed them as small-thinking operators who lacked the vision and ambition to build something great. The specific characterizations in Kroc's autobiography and in McDonald's corporate histories presented the brothers as obstacles to progress, rather than as innovators whose creation made everything else possible. Kroc described them as cautious, unimaginative, and focused on their comfortable lifestyle rather than on building a business. He portrayed his conflicts with them over expansion, menu additions, and operational changes as battles between his forward-thinking approach and their backward-looking resistance. The narrative arc positioned Kroc as the hero who overcame the brothers' limitations to create something they never could have achieved. The omissions in these official histories were as significant as the characterizations. The brothers' systematic innovations in kitchen design, their development of the assembly line food preparation system, their creation of the limited menu concept, and their achievement of unprecedented speed and consistency in food service were mentioned but not emphasized. The impression left was that the brothers had stumbled onto a successful formula that Kroc had then perfected and expanded, rather than that they had deliberately engineered a revolutionary system that Kroc had commercialized largely unchanged. The trademark and copyright control Kroc exercised after the purchase prevented the brothers from using the system they had created or from claiming credit for innovations they had developed in any commercial context. They couldn't open new restaurants using the Speedee Service System they had pioneered because that system was now McDonald's proprietary operational model. They couldn't market themselves as the creators of fast food or as restaurant consultants based on their McDonald's experience, because doing so might imply endorsement or connection to McDonald's that could constitute trademark infringement. And they couldn't write their own accounts of McDonald's founding for publication without risking legal action for interfering with McDonald's corporate interests. The legal mechanisms that enforced this silence were comprehensive and intimidating. McDonald's Corporation had legal resources and trademark rights that could be used to threaten or sue the brothers if they attempted to capitalize on their McDonald's association. The brothers, having received their $2.7 million and having no ongoing relationship with the corporation, had no legal standing to challenge how the company presented its history or to demand recognition for their contributions. They were effectively silenced through the combination of contractual buyout and corporate legal power. The franchise system Kroc built after the purchase accelerated dramatically, demonstrating that whatever the brothers' contributions to creating the operational system, Kroc's contribution to scaling it nationally was substantial and genuine. Within a few years of the 1961 purchase, McDonald's was opening hundreds of locations annually. The growth wasn't just expansion, but systematic replication of a refined model that Kroc and his team had developed based on the brothers' foundation, but extended and improved in ways the brothers likely wouldn't have pursued. The innovations Kroc's organization added to the brothers' original system included more sophisticated real estate site selection using demographic analysis and traffic patterns, standardized building designs that created consistent brand identity, national advertising campaigns that built brand awareness beyond what individual franchises could achieve, management training programs that professionalized restaurant operations, supply chain systems that ensured consistency across thousands of locations, and menu additions like the Big Mac and Egg McMuffin that broadened McDonald's appeal. These weren't trivial additions, but substantive improvements that made the system more successful than the brothers' original version. The corporation's public offering in 1965 created substantial wealth for Kroc and early investors, while the brothers received nothing beyond their 1961 payment. The IPO valued McDonald's Corporation at approximately $60 million, more than 20 times what the brothers had received for selling their rights 4 years earlier. Kroc's personal stake was worth approximately $30 million after the IPO, and this was just the beginning of the value creation that would continue for decades. The brothers, watching this wealth creation from the outside, must have experienced profound regret about the 1961 sale terms. The stock price appreciation following the IPO was extraordinary. Within 5 years, the stock had increased tenfold. Within 10 years, it had increased 50-fold. Early investors who had put modest amounts into McDonald's before the IPO became millionaires. Kroc became fabulously wealthy, eventually worth hundreds of millions and then over $1 billion. The brothers had no share in any of this appreciation because they had sold all rights for a fixed payment with no equity stake or continuing royalties. The expansion pace through the 1960s and 1970s was breathtaking. By 1968, there were 1,000 McDonald's locations. By 1970, there were 1,500. By 1972, there were 2,200. By 1976, there were 4,000. By 1980, there were 6,200. By Kroc's death in 1984, there were over 7,500 locations. Each of these openings represented franchise fees, real estate revenues, equipment sales, and supply contracts that generated income for McDonald's Corporation. The cumulative wealth created was in the billions of dollars, and the brothers received nothing beyond their initial $2.7 million. The international expansion that began in the late 1960s with locations in Canada and Puerto Rico, and that accelerated through the 1970s with entry into Europe, Asia, and other markets, created a global brand that transcended American borders. McDonald's became one of the first truly global restaurant brands, recognized worldwide and generating revenues from dozens of countries. The brothers' original San Bernardino restaurant had served a local California market. Kroc's vision had been national, but the actual achievement became global, creating value far beyond anything either the brothers or Kroc had originally imagined. The brothers' financial outcome was that they received $2.7 million in 1961, roughly $27 million in current dollars accounting for inflation, and nothing thereafter. This amount had seemed substantial at the time. It was more money than the brothers had ever imagined having, and it provided financial security for the rest of their lives. But context matters enormously. At the time of the sale, McDonald's Corporation was probably worth $30, $5 million, based on its cash flows and growth trajectory. The brothers received perhaps 6–8% of the company's actual value. Within 4 years, their payment represented less than 5% of the IPO valuation. Within a decade, it represented less than 1% of the company's value. The opportunity cost of the sale was even more dramatic when considering what would have happened if the brothers had negotiated an equity stake rather than a cash buyout. If they had received 10% of McDonald's Corporation in 1961, a reasonable outcome given that they had created the entire system, that stake would have been worth approximately $6 million at the 1965 IPO, $100 million by 1975, and potentially over $1 billion by the time of their deaths. Instead, they received a one-time payment that, while substantial in absolute terms, represented a tiny fraction of the value their creation generated. The living circumstances of the brothers in their later years reflected this disparity. They lived comfortably but modestly in California, with the financial security their $2.7 million provided, but without the transformative wealth that would have come from an ongoing stake in McDonald's. They weren't poverty-stricken or struggling. $2.7 million invested conservatively would have generated income of $150,000, $200,000 annually in the 1960s and 1970s, providing a very comfortable lifestyle. But they weren't wealthy by the standards of those who had built major corporations, and they certainly weren't wealthy by comparison to what their creation had generated for Ray Kroc. The brothers' emotional state in their later years, as revealed in the limited interviews they gave, combined bitterness, resignation, and some degree of self-recrimination. They were bitter about how Kroc had treated them, about the alleged handshake agreement on continuing royalties that he had violated, and about being written out of the McDonald's story. They were resigned to the outcome, recognizing that they had been outmaneuvered and that attempting to fight Kroc through lawsuits would have been expensive, uncertain, and emotionally draining. And they expressed some regret that they hadn't been more sophisticated in their business dealings and hadn't recognized what they were giving away. The specific statements Dick McDonald made in later interviews revealed the depth of these feelings. He stated that the handshake agreement with Kroc for ongoing royalties of 1% of gross sales had been violated, and that if honored, this would have generated millions of dollars annually for the brothers. He expressed frustration that Kroc had positioned himself as McDonald's founder when the brothers had created the entire system, and he acknowledged that while $2.7 million had seemed like adequate compensation at the time, with hindsight he recognized they had sold far too cheaply and had been taken advantage of by someone more ruthless and business savvy. The lack of legal action by the brothers against Kroc, despite their claims of breach of the handshake agreement, raises questions about why they didn't sue. The most likely explanations include that handshake agreements are difficult to prove and enforce in court, especially when the other party denies them. That litigation against McDonald's Corporation would have required resources the brothers didn't want to spend, that the brothers weren't litigious by nature and preferred to accept their defeat rather than engage in prolonged legal battle, and that their attorneys may have advised them that their chances of prevailing were limited given the lack of documentation and given Kroc's legal resources. The death of Maurice McDonald in 1971, at age 69, occurred when McDonald's was still accelerating its growth, but when the brothers' marginalization was already complete. Maurice died having seen the company he co-created become a national phenomenon while receiving no recognition and no ongoing benefit beyond the 1961 payment. His obituaries mentioned his connection to McDonald's, but focused more on his local community involvement and personal life than on his business achievements, reflecting how thoroughly he had been written out of the corporate narrative. Richard McDonald's survival until 1998 meant he lived to see McDonald's become one of the world's most valuable brands and most ubiquitous businesses. He saw McDonald's expand to over 25,000 locations worldwide. He saw the company's market capitalization exceed $40 billion. He saw Ray Kroc die in 1984 and be celebrated as a great American entrepreneur and philanthropist. And he experienced the bitterness of watching all this while knowing that he and his brother had created the system that made it possible, but had been excluded from the rewards. The legal questions about whether Kroc's actions constituted fraud, breach of contract, or improper appropriation have been debated by business ethicists and legal scholars for decades. From a legal perspective, Kroc's actions were likely defensible because the franchise agreement was ambiguous, because the handshake agreement on continuing royalties wasn't documented and was disputed, because the buyout was a voluntary transaction where the brothers could have negotiated harder or refused to sell, and because the corporate structures and financial engineering that generated Kroc's wealth operated within legal frameworks even if they exploited the brothers' lack of sophistication. The ethical analysis is less favorable to Kroc. Business ethicists point to several problematic aspects, including the alleged violation of the handshake agreement, which, even if not legally enforceable, represented a moral obligation. The use of information asymmetry where Kroc knew the company's true value while the brothers didn't. The pressure tactics that pushed the brothers to sell rather than good faith negotiation about fair compensation. The vindictive competition against their original restaurant, which served no business purpose, and the historical revisionism that minimized the brothers' contributions while glorifying Kroc's role. The fiduciary duty questions center on whether Kroc, as the brothers' franchising agent under the 1955 agreement, owed them duties that he violated. Generally, agents owe principals duties of loyalty, care, and disclosure, Kroc's real estate strategy that generated profits he didn't share, his exploitation of contract ambiguities to benefit himself at the brothers' expense, and his failure to fully disclose the company's value during buyout negotiations could all be characterized as breaches of fiduciary duty. However, the brothers never pursued these claims, either because they didn't recognize them or because they chose not to fight. The cultural impact of the McDonald's story is that Ray Kroc became celebrated as a great American entrepreneur, while the McDonald brothers were forgotten by most people. Business schools taught the McDonald's case as an example of successful franchising and growth strategy, often without seriously examining the ethics of how Kroc acquired control. The Harvard Business School case study on McDonald's, which was widely used, focused on the business model and growth strategy, while treating the brothers' role as background information. Students learned about franchise systems, real estate strategy, and brand building without grappling with questions about exploitation and fairness. The motivational speaking circuit and entrepreneurship literature celebrated Kroc as an example of persistence and late-life success. The narrative of a 52-year-old milkshake machine salesman who built a billion-dollar empire became inspirational story, taught to aspiring entrepreneurs. Kroc's autobiography, Grinding It Out, became a bestseller that influenced a generation of business people. The title itself emphasized hard work and determination, while obscuring the role that exploitation and ruthlessness had played in Kroc's success. The re-evaluation of the story began gradually in the 1990s and accelerated with the 2016 film The Founder, starring Michael Keaton as Kroc. The film portrayed Kroc as an ambitious salesman who appropriated the McDonald brothers' creation through persistence, manipulation, and ruthlessness. Unlike earlier accounts that had celebrated Kroc uncritically, the film presented a more complex and unflattering portrait that highlighted the ethical problems with his behavior. The brothers were portrayed sympathetically as innovators who were outmaneuvered by someone more cunning and less scrupulous. The public reaction to The Founder suggested changing attitudes about business ethics and about whether success justifies questionable methods. Many viewers expressed sympathy for the McDonald brothers and criticism of Kroc's behavior. Social media discussions debated whether Kroc was a great entrepreneur or an opportunist who stole others' work. The conversation reflected broader cultural questioning of corporate practices and business ethics that had intensified following the 2008 financial crisis and growing awareness of economic inequality. The McDonald's Corporation's response to renewed scrutiny of its founding story has been to acknowledge both Kroc and the brothers while maintaining that the company's success resulted from many contributors' efforts. Corporate histories now typically mention that the brothers created the Speedee Service System and operated the original McDonald's, that Kroc recognized the system's potential and franchised it nationally, and that the company's growth reflected contributions from franchisees, suppliers, employees, and executives. This more balanced narrative attempts to give the brothers some credit while preserving Kroc's central role. The family perspectives on the McDonald's story reveal some of the personal costs beyond the financial losses. The McDonald brothers had no children, so there were no descendants who might have inherited wealth or position if the brothers had maintained ownership stakes. But extended family members have occasionally spoken about the emotional toll on Dick and Mac of being marginalized from their creation. Family accounts describe the brothers as men who became increasingly withdrawn and bitter in later years, uncomfortable with public attention, and reluctant to discuss their McDonald's experience because it brought up painful memories. The broader implications for business ethics include questions about what obligations business partners owe each other beyond legal contracts. The McDonald's case suggests that legal obligations and ethical obligations can diverge significantly, that written contracts don't capture all the implicit understandings and expectations in business relationships, that power imbalances allow sophisticated parties to exploit less sophisticated partners, and that the law provides limited protection for innovators against those who commercialize innovations. The lessons for innovators about protecting their interests center on the importance of clear contracts, the value of legal and business advisors who can identify potential problems, the need to understand fully any agreements before signing, the danger of handshake deals that aren't documented, and the recognition that partners' interests may diverge over time, requiring contractual protections. The McDonald brothers' experience demonstrates what can happen when innovators focus exclusively on creating and operating while neglecting the business and legal dimensions that determine who ultimately benefits from innovation. The questions about fair compensation for innovation versus commercialization remain unresolved. How should rewards be distributed between those who create new systems or products and those who scale them to mass markets? The McDonald brothers created the fast food system, but Ray Kroc built it into a global empire. Arguments can be made that both contributions were essential and that both deserved substantial rewards. The actual outcome was that Kroc received nearly all the financial benefits, while the brothers received a one-time payment that represented a tiny fraction of the value created. Whether this distribution was fair depends on one's perspective about what creates value in business. Ray Kroc's acquisition of McDonald's from Richard and Maurice McDonald represents a case study in how business partnerships can evolve from apparent collaboration into exploitation when one party has greater ambition, fewer scruples, and better understanding of how to use contracts and corporate structures to accumulate control. The McDonald brothers created the fast food system that transformed American dining and built the operational template that made McDonald's successful. Ray Kroc recognized the system's potential, secured rights to franchise it nationally, and then systematically marginalized the brothers until he could buy them out for a fraction of what their creation was worth. The legal mechanisms Kroc used were generally defensible, if sometimes questionable. The 1955 franchise agreement was ambiguous about control and about what revenues were subject to the brothers' royalties. Kroc exploited these ambiguities to accumulate power and wealth the brothers couldn't access. The real estate strategy that generated most of McDonald's profits operated outside the franchise agreement's scope, and the corporate structures Kroc created made it difficult for the brothers to understand or challenge the financial arrangements. The ethical dimensions are more problematic. Kroc allegedly reneged on a handshake agreement to pay the brothers continued royalties beyond the $2.7 million purchase price. He used his operational control to pressure them into selling rather than negotiating in good faith about a fair price, reflecting the company's true value. He minimized their contributions in the company's history while positioning himself as McDonald's founder, and he forced them to rename their original restaurant, demonstrating vindictiveness beyond what business necessity required. The brothers' culpability for their outcome includes their failure to negotiate a clearer franchise agreement, their lack of business sophistication that made them vulnerable to Kroc's financial engineering, and their unwillingness to fight for better terms, either during the franchise relationship or during the buyout negotiations. They were innovators and operators, but not businessmen in the competitive sense, and their limitations allowed Kroc to exploit them. The question of whether McDonald's would have succeeded without Kroc is unanswerable but relevant. The brothers had created the system, but weren't expanding it aggressively. Would someone else have eventually recognized the opportunity and franchised it nationally? Almost certainly. Would that person have treated the brothers more fairly than Kroc did? Possibly not. Kroc's ruthlessness may have been typical of the business culture rather than exceptional, but the brothers' creation had clear value independent of Kroc's contributions, even if Kroc was necessary to commercialize it fully. The legacy is that McDonald's became one of the world's most successful corporations and most recognized brands, employing millions and serving billions of customers, while the brothers who created the system died in relative obscurity with no ongoing stake in what they had built. Ray Kroc became wealthy and famous, celebrated as a great entrepreneur despite the questionable ethics of how he acquired control. The company's success validated Kroc's methods in many observers' eyes, demonstrating that in business, results often matter more than relationships or fairness. For those interested in how business partnerships can shift from collaboration to exploitation, and how ambiguous contracts and information asymmetries create opportunities for the more sophisticated party to accumulate control at the other's expense, the McDonald's story provides a case study that remains relevant to contemporary discussions about franchise relationships, intellectual property, and business ethics. Your perspective on whether Ray Kroc was a visionary entrepreneur who deserved to profit from commercializing the McDonald brothers' innovation, or an opportunist who exploited their lack of business sophistication, would contribute to ongoing debates about what obligations business partners owe each other beyond legal contracts. For continued analysis of business acquisitions, franchise relationships, and the tension between innovation and commercialization, subscribing ensures access to examinations of how businesses evolve and how power shifts within partnerships. Understanding the McDonald's story isn't just business history. It's relevant to contemporary questions about fairness in business relationships, about how innovation should be rewarded, and about whether success justifies the methods used to achieve it.